There we go. And pull up the deck, share screen. There we go. All right. So this opportunity, where's it going? No, that's the other. That's the share like to emails. There we go. This opportunity we're calling the Chicago Forward Grant. It is funded by DCASE, as I said at the top, but in case you are unfamiliar with Cartemquin, we are over 55-year-old organization that is now a nonprofit and started as a collective of folks making documentary film. We are generally speaking focused on the Midwest, not specifically Chicago, all this opportunity is for Chicagoans. And our general goal is to provide resources and support to folks that want to make a nonfiction documentary project. Typically those projects have some kind of social justice bent or social impact aspect to them. So there's a change that people want to see in the world. They're going to tell a story that helps to engage, educate, inform audiences about that change or about that issue. Also, just like much of the media landscape, Cartemquin is in a moment where we're acknowledging that there are many barriers that have historically excluded folks from various backgrounds in participating in the documentary field. So one of the big initiatives of this particular fund also is to give priority consideration to those that the fund is supposed to serve, which is folks that are from or working on stories that are based in the South and West Sides, folks of color, folks from the LGBTQIA community, folks with disabilities. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But the way that we want to do that is to provide funds and resources and networks, other people besides those here at Cartemquin, to help these projects that people are working on happen. So some of the films that you may be familiar with, or you could go and check out to be more familiar with our work, are Hoop Dreams, Minding the Gap, which is on Hulu right now. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Unapologetic has been playing at the Siskel Center, it just released. These are wonderful films. There's actually, the last time I counted, over 75 films that have been Cartemquin films over the years. So if you go to our website, you can check out some of those as well. So the real purpose of this grant is, we're calling it seed funding, first in funding. And we really want to focus on projects that have in some way a response to everything that we've been going through in the last, say, year and a half, from COVID to the murder of George Floyd, to ongoing protests and social unrest and issues that communities have been impacted by during quarantine and the pandemic, etc. Really looking to fund projects that haven't yet gotten any funding or significant funding. And we really want to be able to support emerging filmmakers and maybe even folks that have never made a documentary film before, potentially, as the stories that are being told are really, passionate and connected to you, storyteller, the filmmaker. DCASE essentially raised this money and then chose various community partners in different arts to be a re-grantor, and their priorities are there. So these are the sorts of projects that they wanted to see the organizations like ours who were chosen as a re-grantor to try and support, whether this was projects that address public safety and equity, repair and rebuilding, social issues, organizing, civic engagement. So this is just really a general overview of the sorts of things that they were hoping to support with the grant. And all of this is on the website, which we can put in the chat, that talks about the criteria for the grant. But specifically for anyone that we grant to, this is required by DCASE. It has to be to an individual artist. It can't be to a team or an organization. They have to be a resident of the city of Chicago. And the way that we're proving residency through our application is the same as the Chicago Public Library. And you should be a resident of the neighborhood that the project is about, or you should have a clear connection to either a resident organization or small business that is in the neighborhood that you're telling your story about. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I mentioned this before, but while these are not requirements for applying, we will give priority consideration to any folks that meet the following criteria. So your project is based in and you are living or working in a neighborhood on the south or west side. You identify as Black, Indigenous, or another person of color. You're a member of historically or traditionally excluded community, such as LGBTQ, disability community, and others. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And then also, again, we really want to make sure that the projects that we're supporting have a meaningful connection to the community that the project focuses on. It is not uncommon for us to hear from someone, oh, I think this is a really interesting issue because I read about it in the Trib or Block Club, or I heard a WBEZ story about it. And while that is certainly understandable, I often hear stories that I think are really interesting and would like to know more about, maybe even do a project about them. What we're hoping to support are projects where that connection is a little bit more substantiated, that the work has been done, you've been involved in some way. So it's a little bit more grounded than that, than just like, oh, that was interesting. So the grant awards are going to range from $5,000 to $10,000. That generally correlates to whether it's going to be a short or a feature-length film. And again, these are projects in early development, meaning we by no means expect a completed project by the end of the grant period, which is the end of next year. What we really want to do is support people in the early stages of working on a project so that they can get it to the next level for additional funding. That could in theory be from Cartemquin, although we have a fairly modest amount of funding, but it could be through public television, maybe a streaming platform, maybe some other funder that invests in the issue that you are tackling in your film. So this is a kickstart right at the beginning to try and fund your time, your crew's time to be able to do some of these things, like do your research on the topic, do outreach to more folks in the community, build up your team and be able to start compensating them, drawing up contracts, do some filming, and possibly create a demo, maybe just do a little bit of test footage, a couple scenes, so that you have an example, we call a proof of concept. And you might even have like a pitch, like a deck like this that goes over what your project's about that you could bring to the next level with your project. In addition to the funds, anyone that is a grantee will be assigned a mentor, someone who is working in, living in, or connected in some way to Chicago. We'll also be having check-ins with folks throughout the grant period. And you have the option of doing internal screenings for feedback with staff and Cartemquin associates as you develop the project. There is an expectation that you have something to show. It doesn't have to be a formal demo, that it could be some sample scenes, work in progress, toward the end of next year, so the last few months of the year. And then there's additional funding to support a screening that we hope would happen within the community that's featured in your film. That might look like, say, if you're doing a project about, I'm actually going to talk about, for instance, of a past film of ours, youth homelessness in Chicago, and you're working with nonprofit organizations who provide services to those youth. And you might arrange a screening at one of their locations so that the young people that you have been working with or that are invested in the issue, the people that work in the nonprofits, their families could come see what you've been working on. So it's a sort of celebratory event to be able to share the work with the community that's impacted. So those are the broad strokes of the fund. Originally, our deadline was the end of August, but we've extended it to the end of, I'm just going to restate that, to October 1st. We really wanted to make sure that we did enough outreach, that people knew about it, and I'm just gonna stop talking now and say, are there any questions people have? I'm also gonna stop sharing my screen. And I have a prompting question. I will be that high school teacher that tries to get everyone to talk.
Well, I had a question. How do you determine the amount of the grant?
Generally speaking, in our proposal to DCASE, we were saying $5,000 would be for anything that's short length and $10,000 would be for anything that's feature length.
Okay, so it'd be either or?
Yes.
Okay.
Good question.
I had a question. I have two projects that I'm like very preliminary working on, and I was kind of just wanting clarity on the sort of the Chicago guideline of it. One of the projects I'm hoping to work on involves a legal case that technically takes place in a Chicago suburb, but it's like a state level case. I don't know if that would like fall under the guidelines of this project, since it seems like a lot of what you were mentioning is very Chicago centered. I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit more on sort of what the lines are for that.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of this grant, because it is DCASE funded, like that is one of the hardest lines, right, that we have, which is that it is based in the city. So if there was a way to say, depending on the manner in which you wanted to tell the story, the legal services they received, that person potentially lives in Chicago, if there was sort of like, anything related to what the defendant, or because I don't know if it's criminal or civil, like if some aspect of the story was really based in Chicago, I think you could probably make, this sounds like a pun and it really isn't meant to, a case for it being a Chicago story. But if it were, yeah, I know that was really lame. Thanks, Melissa. If it's really primarily based in the burbs, I would say that it's not a good fit for this fund.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the first cycle for this particular grant? Is this a new grant?
So in the spirit of transparency, it is both the first and likely the only specifically through DCASE. DCASE raised these funds in response to COVID. However, it is, and while it is the first time we're offering this kind of regranting, Cartemplin has offered other regranting in the past. And specifically, we've usually focused that on alumni of our filmmaker development programs, whether that was the Diverse Voices in Docs Fellowship, the Cartemplin internship, or a screening series we have called Cartemplin Labs. This is strategically a moment when we are wanting to expand who has access to these resources. So it's the first time one of these funds has been available, regardless of if you've done one of these filmmaker development programs with us. But that is certainly a direction that we want to go to in the future. And specifically funding that early part of working on a project is really important to us, because we see that as one of the least served periods of work on a project. And so we want to be able to lower the barriers to creative entry, more or less, for folks to start working on a project.
And how many grantees are awarded this grant?
So we kind of have flex, because it will be determined somewhat on how many shorts versus features. Like we don't have a cap on either, but it's probably going to be between 5 and 8. I would say. And I taught English, not math. So if that doesn't work out in the math thing, I know 5 would be a lower bound and around 7 or 8 would be a higher bound, probably. I don't want that to discourage anyone either. While 10,000 is the most that we might award, we do want the flexibility potentially to go to DCASE and say, okay, this is the amount that's going out, but we really want to give it to these 8 or 9 or these. Does that make sense? So we don't have a specific number set right now. Good question.
I guess going along with my earlier question, can you submit more than one project?
We didn't put anything in the criteria that would limit someone from doing that.
Okay, cool.
I would say too, one thing that's helpful to know if you aren't familiar with Cartemquin and the work that we have supported in the past is typically Cartemquin films are very character driven. While many of our documentaries have had sort of educational, informational, we call like talking head interview aspects to them, we're more about whether it's like stem cell research or breast cancer or whatever it might be. A lot of times films that we work with, though not always, follow visuals, that being sort of the route through which you learn about an issue, a challenge, and more about, that. So person first, as opposed to topic first or issue first. And I'm not saying that in order to dictate how you might tell a story, but to say if anyone was looking at that bulleted list of what DCASE is really looking to fund, don't feel like you have to do a PSA that's about, something really specific to COVID. We're relatively open to what that issue might be. And it is, I don't know if it's myopic or what, it's hard to imagine that there isn't an aspect of living in this city right now that hasn't been impacted in the last year and a half by what we've all gone through. So if it's an idea you have that's been germinating since pre-COVID and you've been like, oh, well, COVID's really kind of changed how I might do that project, I think you might still be able to successfully apply for this, if that makes sense.
I have a question about sort of the nature of the piece and if it's been published in other outlets, if it's still viable for the application. So I have a project that started as a personal thing, wanted to develop into a feature-length documentary. Then it turned into a short that PBS picked up, but I want to take it further.
Yes, got it.
So that's all cool. Okay.
I'm reading something into it. I want to make sure that you want to take it further, like you might want to do a different version of a short or back into a feature.
A fuller story, because
story.
Yeah, PBS is giving me like 5-10 minutes, so I want to be able to tell a fuller story.
Gotcha. I think I would just focus on what would be sort of the new project, if that makes sense. You can, and this is not, a question, but just so everyone on the call knows, you can submit past documentary work as a sample, but you need not have footage for this particular project. And you don't have to submit film work as a sample. If you're a photographer, a blogger, an artist of another media, you can submit that as evidence of past creative work, and that is fine. I think, Sam, in your application, I would focus on sort of what this new project version or film would be, separate from the 5 or 10 minutes that's going to air on PBS.
Okay.
But I would say too, the real primary goal of this fund is to fund work that hasn't yet received a lot of funding, hasn't yet, you wouldn't apply to this like, oh, Netflix is interested, that sort of it. It would be
Okay.
Earlier in the project than that. Ade, are you asking a question?
Sorry, Laura.
It's okay.
Yes, I was asking, so if I wanted to submit footage, is that okay? Okay.
You can, yes.
I can if I want to.
But it's not required.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
might still be very much like in the ideation stage, so someone doesn't have to.
Okay, thank you so much.
Whoa. Okay. If there are not other questions, I did say that I was going to get a little high school teacher. Does anyone want to do a whip around, share like a sentence about the sort of project that you're thinking about working on, or the idea that you have?
Yeah, well, the idea I was thinking of was I work with the Bronzeville Neighborhood Farm, which is a, you know, local urban agricultural site on 42nd and Calumet. And our founder, who basically carried this effort over the last decade to its point that it's at now, we're just getting moving. COVID slowed us down, and then we were just kind of getting back into the flow of things. But he was recently murdered, and it was just a really horrific and terrible situation that took place. And in that violent death that he experienced was so much of the issues that we've been working on in establishing this farm. And it's a story I think that really needs to be told and highlighted. And so, I was just happened to be working on some footage on the farm over the last several years, and I did several interviews with him as well. And we were just in the process of kind of taking things to the next level. And now with his untimely death, it just has really brought some challenges that I think a piece would really kind of open up some of those issues and just challenge the community to start looking at ourselves in a different way. So,
Well, I'm so sorry for your loss.
yeah.
What was his name?
Johnny Owens, very well-known community organizer. In fact, him and President Obama had kind of cut their teeth at the same time when they were coming up. And in fact, President Obama sent a letter to be read at the service. And yeah, so it's even hard for me to talk about it now. I just find it so devastating. But like I say, there are a lot of lessons I think that need to be addressed in that story. So,
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. I hope you apply. And thank you for sharing something so difficult.
I didn't mean to bring everybody down. I know it's a terrible thing, and I hesitate to share it sometimes, but it's the reality. But there is a lot of joy in it too. So I don't want to create the impression that it's all doom and gloom. There's a lot of inspiration as well.
Yeah. It is hard right now. So certainly we don't want anyone to feel like they can't bring their experience, reality. Would anyone else want to share? Eric?
Hey everybody, sorry, I'll try one more time. I know you guys couldn't hear me outdoors. I was working outside a cafe. I came inside now. So I've been freelancing for CBS2 and some other news outlets, national and local, throughout this pandemic. And one of the things I've seen constantly, time and time again, is the unfortunate circumstance that a lot of people that look like me or are brown on the south and west sides of the city could care less about COVID-19 and care more about getting killed. It's sort of this virus versus violence thing. The way a lot of people put it is that, people are scared about getting a vaccine shot. I just want to make sure I don't get shot when I go outside. And so I think one of the big things is about people who wake up and their lives really don't revolve around COVID-19 pandemic the way that so much of America and so much of the globe has this past year and a half, because they've already been living through a pandemic for years and decades now for some of them in certain circumstances. And so it's kind of talking about those issues at heart in the South, on the South side, primarily Inglewood is what I focus on, but it's prevalent throughout the South and West sides, and it has been for quite some time in Chicago. So what are the efforts underway being done? The mayor's promised a lot of things. Have they come to fruition? The numbers say no, but I dig deeper into that. I've already, of course, talked to a lot of the people who are working on the ground, trying to do things. There are so many different organizations that try to lend a hand to helping stop violence. The Violence Interrupters are one of the big ones that I've followed for some years. Tio Hardiman, who I know has been spotlighted in some pieces in the past, but just providing an update on his group, how they try to infiltrate gangs and get them to stop before, the killing starts. And I think that would be a really interesting piece to do in the wake of COVID-19, because this problem seems to have been exacerbated during the pandemic somehow. Violence went up across the country, and Chicago was not, unfortunately, not immune to that. We saw a spike as well. And so just kind of fleshing that out, explaining it, and telling a different side to how some of these communities that some of us are venture to.
Thanks, Eric. We were able to hear you better that time. And
good, thank you.
if you aren't familiar with it, there is a film that Steve James, who we work with a fair amount over the years, did about ceasefire. Oh, I have trouble remembering how long ago it was now, called The Interrupters. You should definitely check it out. But yes, ongoing issue and also interesting.
Yes, I saw it. It's incredible. He's my favorite documentarian.
Yeah, it was a good film. I saw it as well.
Mateo?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks. I wanted to ask before going over the idea. I know I chimed in a little late here. If awarded the grant, and obviously the project moves forward with the funding, is there still the possibility or the ability rather to submit the film to film festivals? Or is there some kind of restriction there? Like, how does that work?
No, thank you for asking. That's really helpful and important. And also, this is sort of related to Sam's question. I should make sure it's known that beyond the community-based screening at the end of next year of whatever you've been able to develop at that point, there are no contractual or rights obligations to Cartemplin. So we'll sort of have a report back where you share what you were able to accomplish during the grant. We'll have the culminating screening in your community. There'll be a collecting of all the grantees with Cartemplin. If folks continue on to finish it later, want it to end up on a platform, whether that's, WTTW, where you're, getting it out there in festivals or, on a streaming platform, that is completely possible. There's no requirement that that the final project be posted anywhere online or anything for free. You are able to do with it whatever you hope to next. This is really meant to be an investment in the early development of the project.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Yeah. And, as far as ideas, yeah, sort of like how Eric and Amadillo already mentioned, I mean, Chicago is at a unique intersection, right, of dealing with, the public health crisis and issues because of the COVID-19 pandemic, while at the same time at that intersection, confronting violence. So, yeah, definitely exploring something within that realm from my community. But thank you for the invitation and for answering that question. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And also because I'm whatever, I really love your Instagram. James, your question. We will be posting the recording. We'll put it up probably early next week on the Cartempoin website, which Alyssa posted the link, I believe, earlier. Yes. And probably also up on social media, though maybe not right away, just to help answer folks' questions. So that will be accessible later. Are there any other people that wanted to share something you're thinking of submitting or have questions about eligibility or purpose of the fund? No?
I have one other quick question. Is a budget required for this proposal?
Oh my gosh, you gave me the hard question. I'm fairly certain there is not, but let me go back and I promise to correct the record if that is not the case. But I'm fairly certain there is not. One of the things we tried to do with this app, and if any of you are familiar with applying to other programs of ours, is again like reduce the barriers to entry. So acknowledging that this is early on in the development of the project, not expecting someone to necessarily know what a full budget for a feature or even a short might be yet. I do believe we ask how you intend to use this either 5,000 or 10,000 for the purposes of this grant period. All good questions. Love the stump the teacher questions too. All right. If that is everything. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all for coming. And I hope you apply